Welcome to The Atypical View. I'm your host, Lauren Florio, a licensed marriage and family therapist specializing in autism, ADHD, and broader neurodiversity. As a fellow neurodivergent mind, I'm here to help us learn and spread awareness on all things mental health, as well as help us unlearn harmful stereotypes by providing psychoeducation rooted in research and lived experience rooted in my atypical view. The Atypical View is obviously this podcast, but it's also my private practice where I provide therapy to clients here in California with me and provide neurodiverse coaching to others worldwide. So, without further ado, let's jump into the Atypical View. Hello, and welcome back to the Atypical View. Today, we will once again be challenging the status quo of mental health and neurodiversity through honest conversations, research, and real stories. I'm your host, Lauren Florio. Today, we are going to be diving into a topic that not only hits home with me, but many women and AFAB folks navigating late diagnosed autism, being misdiagnosed and misunderstood. Let's kick off our psychoeducation portion of today's podcast. For decades, autism has been defined by what it looks like in white and cisgender boys. This has had a massive ripple effect, affecting diagnostic tools, research studies, and the public's understanding of what it means to be autistic is now affected through a very narrow lens. This has left many autistic women and AFAB individuals overlooked, mislabeled, or completely missed. Before I continue, I do want to note that the next episode will be focused on more of the cultural or racial backgrounds, including socioeconomic backgrounds that affect these misdiagnoses or incorrect diagnoses as well. So it's not that I'm ignoring it today. We're just starting with women, as it is a big chunk of the population. It's half of us. Let's start with the research gap. For years, women have been excluded from autism studies because of a belief that their hormone cycles made data too messy. Sounds outdated, right? It is. However, this logic built an entire diagnostic system around male-centric norms. And it's only been in the past decade that research has started to meaningfully include women. That exclusion still impacts how we diagnose autism today. And I would like to point out, this issue is not just an issue in autism or psychology-based research. It is all research. And again, why we're going to get into some of the racial aspects as well, because it's not only men, but it is white men. So things have changed. We are making an attempt to include the diversity of our population as of the last 5 to 10 years, but that's pretty pathetic, all things considered. So the other part of this is masking, which I've already talked about, but autistic women camouflage their traits to blend into society. It can look like mimicking peers, scripting conversations, mirroring emotions, forcing eye contact. From the outside, it could seem like they're coping just fine, they're well-adjusted, they're low support needs, but underneath is a chronic exhaustion, anxiety, depression, and in many cases, complex trauma. This leads to burnout, which I also did an episode on. Masking isn't a sign that your autistic friend or loved one is thriving. It's a survival strategy, and that person is probably really struggling in silence. Add to that the pressure of gendered expectations. We can pretend that men and women aren't treated differently all we want, but it's just not the reality. Girls are socialized to be kinder, more compliant, more intuitive. When they struggle with sensory overload or social cues, many learn to perform neurotypically just to avoid being judged or excluded. And when they inevitably slip up, they're often punished socially in ways that their male counterparts simply aren't. This not only leads to misdiagnosis, but it leads to a chronic attempt to create perfectionism in autistic girls' social connections. And when autism criteria quite literally includes struggling socially to some degree, it's going to be expected that we're going to mess up. I am going to mess up. All of the girls with autism and women with autism are going to mess up socially. It's part of the criteria. It's part of the reality of the lived experience. And so not allowing for grace and, you know, some kindness in the same way that we do for autistic boys is a huge disservice to a huge chunk of the autistic community. Now, instead of autism, women are frequently misdiagnosed with things such as borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, complex PTSD. And while this might capture some, overlapping symptoms, it's not the underlying cause. And I will say, being medicated for something that you don't have can be very dangerous. Being put on bipolar medication, for example, when you are not bipolar, that can cause serious not only like side effects, but long-term ones. And it's really a disservice that we jump to conclusions in the mental health industry, especially when it comes to medicating someone. The same issue shows up in ADHD. What we see is more likely that boys are hyperactive, while girls may be more inattentive. We see those signs of forgetfulness, maybe moments of emotional outbursts or intensity. We see them sometimes lost in thought, having their own internal worlds. And traits like this are brushed off as being too sensitive or being lazy. And with high expectations on women in this society, many women don't get diagnosed, especially until late adulthood, if at all. And I see a pattern of not only with ADHD women, but other types of neurodiverse women as well. They get this diagnosis after their child was diagnosed first. And then, as it is genetic, if your child's autistic, if your child has ADHD, you as a parent are likely to have it. It's you or your partner or potentially both. So, it could skip a generation, I suppose, but many physicians encourage the parents to get tested, and as they should. What we need here is a diagnostic overhaul. We need something rooted in inclusive research, neurodivergent affirming tools, a willingness to challenge the old scripts about what autism and ADHD and every other mental health and physical health condition is supposed to look like. Not to get off script here, but heart attacks in women do not look like heart attacks in men. We are failing women in the society due to this criteria. And it's a devastating reality that we have spent so much time with research that only includes white men. It's sad and it's embarrassing. I won't lie. So this is a good time to transition into the second segment of today's episode, which is the atypical view, where I share my lived experience based on today's topic through my atypical view. When I think about my childhood or even, patterns that I see with my clients who are late diagnosed, I see a lot of differences in our male counterparts. I see more socially acceptable, in quotes, special interests. Or if the special interest isn't as socially acceptable, a intentional hiding of that, having that be in private, quiet quarters, not being able to gush about the things that you love because of the lack of the social acceptance of that. For example, a lot of my special interests revolve around art, and that's relatively socially acceptable. However, my interest in things like specific video games, like The Legend of Zelda, people don't want to hear a near 30-year-old woman gush on about a video game from the 90s. That's one of those things for me that was hidden. And I see that with a lot of my clients. That's something that I really try to work on together is how can we go back and create some safety? It starts typically with doing it in your own, the comfort of your own space. But I see with a lot of my clients and myself that eventually that leads to giving something you deeply care about up forever or for a long period of time. I really let go of a lot of my art and video games and stuff like that in high school because it wasn't it wasn't how I got friends. And I really shifted myself to fit what was normative to gain friendships. And truthfully, like, I don't think it worked so well because I don't even in my best attempt to be socially normal, in quotes, I look back and I'm like, there's so many signs. Like, I was still socially unaware and awkward. And I think back in childhood too, I see a lot of like women who are very shy and quiet. I wish that was me. That was not the case. I've said this before when I'm talking about ADHD. I had hyperactive ADHD, so I was really struggling to hide a lot of these traits. I do think that inherently, like, I did have a pretty strong internal world, internal, like, in my mind play. I was very imaginative, and I could kind of like live inside of my brain and sit in a classroom, doze off, and just have like a whole movie in my head or exploring in my brain. One of the other things I see too is autistic women. I see a lot more like a greater social awareness, again, that I feel is really trained into them, but also a greater social desire, which I can't speak to if that is more like of a social thing or not, but I do see the female counterparts to the autistic experience tend to have a higher drive of having more friendships and connecting more socially, even though it can be exhausting, the desire is stronger. I also see a ton of internalized anxiety and depression like symptoms, likely due to the high expectations set by society and peers and family and friends and work and everything that comes with it. When you're already balancing so much to just get through the day in a way that is perceived well, adding on the other expectations of literally being alive and a human being and having a job and having responsibilities can be incredibly hard, if not impossible, depending on your capacity that day, that week, that month. I think when we're talking about like research and also education and where I feel like that fails in my personal experience, I know I'm like a parrot and I think I said this before, but I truly think I had one slide on neurodiversity as a whole. It might have been like two slides on like one was autism and one was ADHD, and that was kind of it in my college. Not a chapter, not like it was like a class, it felt like 5 minutes. It's been a while. I could be remembering wrong, but truly it was so negligible in the grand scheme of everything else that we learned. When neurodiversity is so complex and truly at least a third of the population is neurodiverse, I think it's a failure in our education system. I have heard people say in their programs that there has been adjustments, but truly like there needs to be an improvement. Like the call to action to schools is to update your curriculum. You need to update your curriculum. You cannot be teaching the same things you were teaching in the 80s. This is insane. We have updated research. You need to be updating your curriculum yearly. I don't care. I don't care if you think it's unrealistic. You're a school. You're supposed to teach accurate information. It's insane to me that we don't have updated information in our mental health programs. So if you can't tell I'm passionate about this, like, update your curriculum. If you're a teacher and you're listening about this, talk about neurodiversity. I beg of you. And talk about it correctly, please. Do appropriate research. Don't just regurgitate the same things that have been regurgitated for decades. I also want to point out how the research and the criteria affects me personally. Obviously I was late diagnosed, and I've spoken about how great it is to understand myself better and how hard that process was too, like wrapping my head around what it meant to be autistic and, what parts of me felt authentic again, and really connecting with myself in that way and letting my like true self show up again. Like, that's been really, really wonderful. But I also am resentful that couldn't have come sooner, and I couldn't have learned to be authentic when I was young and navigate things in this way when I was younger. I can't speak to how it would have been to go through school, out as someone with autism. I think it would be hard. I won't lie. But school was hard anyway. Now that I'm thinking about it, like school was hard anyway. And maybe I would have had a little bit more grace, and maybe I would have had a little bit more support, like from the school and from teachers. And I felt like I was a chicken with my head cut off, truly. And yeah, it would have been wonderful to have this research be correct when I was young and be appropriately diagnosed. I think all of the misdiagnoses that I've received, like I've I've spent literally less than 5 minutes with a psychiatrist, and they're like, "So you have bipolar, you have BPD, you have," and it's like, dude, you don't even have my like chart right now. You spent 3 seconds talking to me, and you decided. And that's funny because they'll like ask me questions of like, "Oh, do you ever like not need any sleep and you just run on no sleep?" And I'm like, "Nope, I sleep 9 hours a night. I need a lot of sleep." And they're like, I think you're lying. You have bipolar." Not that there's anything wrong with having any type of mental health diagnosis, but there is something wrong with trying to fit someone into a box that with their like a circle. Like, I'm not a square. Stop trying to shove me into a square container. And like I said earlier, the medication side of things, like that can be dangerous. Pushing the wrong diagnosis onto someone else is never a good thing. For example, I have POTS, which is a fainting disorder, and I was diagnosed with seizures, and I took seizure medications, and they almost like made me blind. It was a temporary side effect, thankfully, but I literally lost my vision on them. Like, you can't you can't just explore with medication to find the right diagnosis. So that's a big pet peeve of mine. I also think inherently, like, having the criteria be for white boys, and it just, the imposter syndrome is there of not being what the world sees as autism is hard. Even in my own family, I don't think that there's a lot of acceptance for me as I am. I have people in my family who don't believe that I'm autistic, which is, it sucks. I'm like, this is literally my profession. I've been formally assessed. Like, it's just so hard. Some people don't want to believe in professionals, and that sucks, but it is what it is. I think that maybe if the research was better and the public's view of autism was better, maybe I would have a better support system. So that's hard. These issues with research and criteria, like, it really does affect people's lives. I think like the final thing I would add here is what I wish people understood about women with autism. As loudly and clearly as I can possibly say this, I am not your 6-year-old son. I am not your cousin who is nonverbal. I am not your little brother who loves planes. I am a nearly 30-year-old woman who has navigated a full life under the expectations of society and without a lot of support in my life. I am still autistic. I have meltdowns. I hit myself. I shut down. I go nonverbal. But I am also what's considered a hyperverbal autistic because I don't shut up sometimes. I am still autistic just because I am not like the other autistic person you know in your life, especially the small male children in your life. I'm a 30-year-old woman. So I really do wish people could understand that. And another thing, when we talk about autism as a spectrum, it's not this like line and some of us are a little bit autistic. That is not what that spectrum means. Spectrum is not the line. You either are autistic or you are not. It's not a matter of how strong the autism is. Like, I know it's a joke, but the touch of autism isn't real. You either are autistic or you're not, and you have different levels based off of your support needs, not based off of how strong the autism is in your brain. You're either autistic or you're not. Even people with profound autism are not inherently more autistic. The symptoms just affect them in a way that is more profound and affects their ability to take care of themselves and meet their needs, and they require more care. But my brain is just as autistic as their brain. And I hope that that makes sense. How it affects my brain is going to be different. My level of sensory needs is going to be different than somebody else's. my executive functioning, my anxiety, my need for routine, things like depression symptoms, uh, you know, speech and nonverbal communication and stimming and social skills and emotional regulation, all of these things, motor skills and coordination, all of these things are a part of autism, and all of these things may be what is stronger or less pervasive based off of your brain. But the autism is not different from brain to brain. How it affects these different, profiles is what's different. So that's my little rant. You are not a little bit autistic. And if I ever say that in a joke on TikTok, please know it's a joke. So let's see. I think that I have ranted enough in my typical view. So let's move into closing things out, moving into our final segment. This is the call to action part of our podcast today. And today we're going to work on listening and learning. So, first off, if this episode resonated with you, I just encourage you to take a step today to connect with neurodiverse women's stories, autistic women, ADHD women, women with OCD, women's stories outside of mental health, women's health care. We want to listen to the people who are experiencing symptoms. We especially want to listen to women's voices through real lived experiences. There's some suggestions today that I want to provide. The fun way of approaching it is follow an autistic creator, an AFAB woman, or a woman on Instagram or TikTok, and watch some reels of their sharing their autistic diagnosis journey, sharing their symptoms of ADHD, sharing their mental or physical health, and just listen. Just listen and be open-minded. You could do some research of your own and read an article. A good one is Autism in Women and Girls and Why It's Often Diagnosed Late by Simply Psychology. I think that one dives into a lot of what we're talking about today in an easy to read kind of way. Or you could pick up a book if you want a deeper kind of dive into a broader neurodivergent experience through the book Divergent Minds by Janara Nuremberg. I think I recommended this before, but it's a beautifully written dive into neurodivergent women and the challenges they face in a world built for different brains. It is a collection of interviews essentially with a bunch of different neurodiverse profiles from like autism to like synesthesia. It's so cool. Really, really enjoyed it. The one warning I will give for that book is that the term HSP, highly sensitive person, is actually just autism. And I say this like holding your hand, and I'm sorry if this takes away something you resonate with. But the woman who coined the term HSP later came back and said, hey, I coined that term based off of, I think it was their nephew who was later diagnosed with autism. And the symptoms that they pulled from that was just a profile of someone with autism. So HSP is not like a get out of jail free card. If you're not ready to accept autism, you should consider getting us assessed. That's not me diagnosing you, but you probably should consider assessment. Anyway, that's the only thing that I feel like qualifying a little disclaimer in it that I would give you a warning about. But that book like really expanded how I think about myself, my family. It gave me a lot of grace and empathy for lived experiences in that way. So that would be my recommendation to start with, is just connect. Listen to women. Listen to women's stories. We are going through more than you think. We are stronger than you think. We are still a minority. And so whether you are a woman who is neurodiverse, or maybe you don't fall under those categories at all, I still would encourage you to lift up the voices of the women in our community. Thank you so much for listening today, and I hope that you learned something. Thanks for spending this time with me today. If this episode resonated with you, feel free to share it, subscribe, leave a comment or a review, or send it to someone who might benefit from the psychoeducation, or just need a little reminder that they are not alone. If you are interested in my coaching or therapy services, you can reach out to me directly and connect with me at theatypicalview.com. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and I hope we can stay connected.